And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, we're going to start talking about employment and unemployment. So on previous podcasts, previous playlists, we've been talking about the gross domestic product, how much how much goods and services a country produces in a year, and that level of production very much affects our second variable that we care about in macroeconomics, and that is employment. So let's first get some definitions out of the way. First of all, what does employment mean? Employment, I mean, is a pretty obvious definition. It's people who are currently holding a job. People currently holding, sorry, that should be holding a job right there, my apologies. People currently holding a job, either a full job or a part-time job, are considered to be employed. And so kind of the opposite of that is unemployment, which is what economists are often talking about. And unemployment is people who are searching for work. They're currently searching for work, and they are not employed. They are looking for work and they can't find it. Okay, that's the key. So they're looking for work. That's what they're searching. They're looking for work, but they can't find it. They can't find the job. Okay, they want to work, but nobody's hiring them for whatever reason. And we'll get into those reasons later on. That's called unemployment. And then just very quickly, we get into the math here real fast because we want to calculate what we call the unemployment rate. So to calculate the unemployment rate, we're going to identify, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, how we identify people, but there's phone surveys and all kinds of different ways of gathering data on how many people there are in a society that is unemployed and how many people there are in what we call the labor force. Okay, and I don't want to get too deep into these definitions right now. We'll talk about all that later. I just want to do a little bit of the math. So just kind of general concept. You have the labor force. These are all the people, let's just say, that are looking for work. We're going to call that the labor force. We'll tighten that definition up a little bit later. So it's all the people that are looking for work. They're trying to find work, and some of them find work and some of them don't. And the ones that don't, they're called unemployed. And so we want to know what percentage of the people who are in the labor force looking for work, what percentage of them can't find it and are therefore unemployed. And that is called the unemployment rate. So I'm going to calculate the unemployment rate for the year 2002, just so you can see this. So to do that, I'm going to bring up some statistics. So I'm going to bring up some statistics. So here are some statistics, and you're going to have to kind of bear with me. This chart has a lot of numbers on it, and I'm going to be moving it around, and I'll try to do it in a way that you can follow what I'm doing. But before I do anything else, let me just mention the source of all this data is coming from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Federal Reserve System, in addition, the economic report to the president in 2013, and also the U.S. Energy Information Administration. So all these organizations together are providing us these numbers. All right, so let me just move this chart around. So just hang with me here for a second. So I got to move this chart, and what this chart does is it gives me all kinds of data. So now you can see over here on the left-hand column all kinds of statistics that are being provided. So gross domestic product, which we talked about on a previous podcast. We talked about the gross domestic product, and that gross domestic product gets broken down into consumption, investment, government spending, net exports, and all those numbers are provided here. So for example, in 1986, the level of, and these are in the trillions, by the way, so $2.8 trillion of consumption happened in 1986. $849 billion of investment happened. $975 billion of government purchases, and then net exports were a negative $131 billion. You add all those up, and that gives you the gross domestic product for 1986, which was $4.5 trillion. And then you can look at that over time. So let me just kind of scan across here. Here's the gross domestic product over time. So I'm just going to kind of scan along here. Sorry. Just going to kind of move along here, and we can look through this data. 1988 going by, and I'm just going to go kind of fast because I want to get up to date here a little bit. And we can see this data all the way up through 2012. Okay, so we could track that gross domestic product number over time, and we'll look more at that later. But I just want to highlight one thing here. 2008, 2009 is important because the gross domestic product actually goes down. It was 14.7 trillion in 2008, and it was 14.4 trillion in 2009. And that's what we call a recession, when the gross domestic product goes down. Okay, so let's get rid of that data. That's gross domestic product. But what we want to look at right now is sorry, sometimes this can be a little hard to move. What I want to look at right now is unemployment. So let's go over to down to unemployment data. So we have the gross domestic product data that was here. I'm going to scroll down here. There's some other statistics here that we will look at later. But the statistics that I care about right now are unemployment. So the data that is given here is they give data for they tell us who the civilian labor force is. So remember, that was in our formula, the civilian labor force. And then underneath that, they give us the total number of people in that labor force that were employed. These numbers are all in the millions. They give us the total number of people who were unemployed. And then line 17, we calculate the unemployment rate. So I'm going to slide across here again. So I apologize. Moving this chart all around is a little hard to watch. I'm going to slide this across to the year 2002. So here's the year 2002, and then I can just kind of tell you where things were. This column, or this row right here, this was the civilian labor force. So in 2002, there were 144.9 million people who were looking for work, who were in the civilian labor force. And then the employed out of those was 136.5 million. That means out of the 144.9 million people who were looking for work, 136.5 million of them found work. And then 8.4 million people who were looking for work didn't find it. So these were the people that were called unemployed. So to calculate the unemployment rate, I'm going to take the number of people who were unemployed, 8.4 million, divided by the number of people in the labor force, 144.9 million, and calculate my answer. So let me go back to our formula here, and we're going to take the number of people who were unemployed on that chart, and that was 8.4 million people who were unemployed, and we divide that by the number of people in the labor force, and that was 144.9 million people who were in the labor force. And then I multiply that by 100, and if you run those calculations, you get an unemployment rate of it's like 5.78 or something, 5.79%, something like that, and that rounds up to 5.8%. So that was the unemployment rate in 2002. So let me just go back to that chart again. If I go back to that big chart, we can see in 2002, there were 144.9 million people in the labor force. 8.4 million of them were unemployed, and the unemployment rate, there it is on the next line, was 5.8%. Was 5.8%. Now, what is considered to be a low or a high unemployment rate? Let's just take a look at some select years. So I'm going to bring up another chart here. It's actually the same chart, just goes all the way back to 1929, and I'm going to move it around again, so my apologies. I'm going to move it down here to the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate here is on line 17. And look at the unemployment rate in 1929. The unemployment rate is 3.2%. And then look at the unemployment rate in 1933, goes to 24.9%. That's the middle of what is known as the Great Depression of the 1930s. And that unemployment rate is going to stay elevated. In 1939, it's at 17.2%. In 1940, it's at 14.6%. But look what happens by 1944. By 1944, the unemployment rate is down to 1.2%, and that, of course, is because of World War II. So the unemployment rate goes all the way down to 1.2%. So what's unemployment rate in more recent times? So let's just go back to the other chart, and again, sorry for kind of jumping around here. So let's go over to the most recent data that I have on this chart. So this line right here is the unemployment rate, and we can see that unemployment rate in recent times is going to be, like in 2001, it was 4.7%. And by the way, that's kind of normal. That's kind of what our expectation is in the United States. You know, maybe 4%, 5%, 6%. 6% starting to get a little bit high, but not too awfully high. So those are kind of normal. 4.7%, we're okay with that. 5.8, 6%, 5.5%, and so forth. But look what happens from 2008 to 2009. Remember, I said with the GDP that it went down. We went into a recession, and so the unemployment rate, unsurprisingly, goes up. When we are producing less stuff, that means fewer workers get hired, and the unemployment rate almost doubles from 5.8% to 9.3%, and continues to stay high, 9.6, 8.9, 8.1. And when you're up around 8, 9, 10%, that's considered for the United States to be very high unemployment. And of course, Great Depression, 24.9%, that's really elevated levels of unemployment. So sorry for all the numbers and for this big chart. I know it's a little hard to read when you're watching the video, but hopefully you could follow. What we needed to do here was we needed to calculate the unemployment rate, and then just identify the unemployment rate over some time periods. All right, we'll talk more about unemployment on another podcast. Thanks for joining me. This has been Mr. Hagan, and we'll see you on the next podcast.